The house was quiet in the way big houses become when they are full of things and empty of people. Balloons hung limp from a chandelier that had never seen a child's fingers reach up to touch it. A cake sat on a silver platter under a glass dome, white frosting topped with a careful gum paste flower and a single candle never lit. The guests who were supposed to arrive had sent flowers and excuses. The invitations had been accepted by polite inboxes and then ignored when the invitations mentioned the one name nobody wanted to speak aloud. She had been 12 when an accident stole the walking from her. She had been 12 when people began to invent reasons not to look at the wheelchair that had come to feel like a small, unquestioning judge. The father, a man whose suits cost more than many people's cars, arranged the party because he was a man who tried to fix life with arrangements and bookings. The venue was the family estate. The florist had arrived early because even rich people wanted their flowers fresh. The chef had left once he realized his desserts would remain uncut. The guests had offered regrets, busy schedules, sudden flights. The only RSVP that mattered was the one that didn't come. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier waiting for an order he did not want to give. The man who had built companies and bought headlines looked small in the morning light, smaller than the awards on his shelves and the newspaper clippings framed on his study wall. His daughter watched him from her favorite armchair, favored only because it remembered the curve of her back and the softness of her hand. Her hair had been braided into tight, neat plaits by a nurse who came in shifts. Her eyes were kind and unhurried, the way people look when they have learned patience the hard way. "I could cancel it," he said. "You could light the candle," she replied. He looked at her, surprised by the clarity she carried. She had nights of silence where her mouth closed like a fist and mornings where jokes landed like timid birds. Today she wore a dress the color of late summer and socks with cartoon foxes at the ankle because some rebellions were still allowed. "Nobody's coming," he said. They all said what they always say." She smiled with one corner of her mouth. "They said they were sorry. They said they couldn't make it. They said they'd make it up next week. They said they'll send flowers." He moved toward the cake and almost, for the briefest of seconds, allowed the idea of an empty celebration to settle like dust. Then the front door opened, a small sound swallowed by the big house, and a presence came inside that made the air tighten. "Delivery for Ms. Lin," said a voice, young and slightly breathless. A courier usually brought packages, not people. He walked to the doorway. A boy stood there, shoulders stooped beneath a tattered school backpack. He carried a small wrapped box in both hands as if it were a fragile animal. His skin was the color of polished mahogany. His cheeks were full from childhood, and his eyes were the kind that learn quickly how to read the world for what it is and what it might become. He looked at the man, then past him, and his gaze landed on the girl. "Can I?" he asked, simple as a prayer. For a heartbeat the father did not hear. The room hummed. The nurse shifted as if pulled by a thread. The boy's voice had something unmarketed about it. No politeness rehearsed in boardrooms, no cautious diplomacy of the elite. It was frank, a small flame risking more than appearances. "Can you what?" the father said slowly. "Can I wish her happy birthday?" The words were small. The box he held clinked softly, and when he lifted the paper edge his fingers trembled slightly. Inside were 2 homemade cookies, not perfect, slightly browned at the edges, a smear of chocolate between them forming a heart. "I brought them from my class," he added. "We baked them for a community bake sale, but I kept one." The man's mouth opened like a gate that had bolted for years. He wanted to ask where the boy came from. He wanted to lift the boy onto a marble staircase and ask about his references, his school record, the name of his mother's employer. He thought about security, about the headlines if something went wrong. He thought about everything that had always mattered. Instead he found himself saying, "Yes." The boy crossed the room with careful steps and dropped to one knee as if mirroring the posture of knights in old stories. It was an instinctive bow, some childhood echo of respect and wonder. He offered the cookie like it was a treasure and then, as if unsure of protocol, he held it out to the girl. "Happy birthday," he said. She laughed in a way that made light move. It was the sound of someone watching a sunrise that had been delayed. The nurse blinked wetly and wiped at the corner of her eye with the cuff of a uniform. The father felt the ground under his assumptions shift. The room, which had been measured in polite silences and unpaid courtesies, began to breathe. "What's your name?" the girl asked. "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Brown." "Marcus Brown?" She tasted the name as if it were candy. "Thank you." The father swallowed. He had known a world where introductions were contracts. Marcus' voice had none of that. It had the easy honesty of a child who doesn't trade in networks and whose promises are as binding as a sticky week of summer holidays. "Where are you from, Marcus?" the father asked because he was trying to place the boy in the map of his life. Most people had an angle, a way to benefit, a polite tie in their pocket. The father had learned to interrogate the world with a businessman's curiosity. "Down the block," Marcus said. "By the community center. I help at the after-school program. Miss Jada, she's the one who taught me to bake. She said it's important to do something nice for people. She said, you don't need money to make a birthday." The father had a sudden, fierce urge to call Miss Jada, to book her for a gala. The instinct to commodify kindness flashed and then faded. He noticed the girl's hands, the small way her fingers curled when she accepted the cookie. The lift of her shoulders when someone addressed her like a person and not a status. "Sit," the girl said to Marcus, patting the chair beside her. "Tell me about the program." He sat obediently, knees bumping the edge of the chair. The nurse frowned at the informality, but then, with a shrug that said this family had always been a little unorthodox, she retreated to the doorway to brew tea. "There's a garden," Marcus said. "And we read stories. We teach kids to code now. Sometimes we go on field trips to the museum, but most weeks it's pizza and homework. I teach the littlest ones to tie their laces. They don't like it when I make them do practice." A laugh from the girl cut him off. "Practice makes perfect," she said. "She says that at home too," Marcus replied. "At home?" "Yeah." He looked at the father. "My big brother. He says the house is too noisy. He says we should be quiet because he works night shifts. But he lets me bake. He lets me bring cookies to school." The father listened. He thought of the way eating with other people used to be a currency in his world. Networking breakfasts, lunches that turned into deals. He felt the edges of his world, the ones built on polite, convenient relationships, fraying like old fabric. The simplicity of Marcus' life, the brother who worked nights, the neighbor who taught him to bake, the bits of joy shared, was not simple at all. It was rich in a way that his money had never taught him to be. As the afternoon sun slid toward late gold, the driveway filled with the soft patter of feet. One guest arrived, then another, then another. They were not the usual names, no CEOs and tuxes, no glossy magazines. They were neighbors. The woman who ran the deli, the man who fixed the mailboxes, the coach from the community center, a teacher from the school where Marcus came. They wore paint-smudged jeans, aprons, and the kind of shirts that smelt of sweat and optimism. They carried small presents: a paper crown, a hand-drawn card, a knitted scarf, a little robot from the school's STEM fair. "Is this," the father began. "People came because Marcus said there was a party," the girl answered, the candlelight catching the tears at the corner of her eyes. He asked. Marcus stood quiet by the doorway, the center of a web he had not intended to spin. He had simply given what he could. He had asked permission to wish someone happy birthday and somehow invited the neighborhood in with him. The father watched the way his daughter's face lit at each arrival. In a single evening, the room that had felt sterile and staged began to host an entirely different kind of abundance. A young woman from the after-school program brought paper crowns she and the kids had folded. A retired postal worker produced a battered stuffed bear with one eye missing, given precious because it had been loved before. A coach in a whistle told a terrible joke that made the girl laugh so hard she cried. They clapped off-key and sang the birthday song like a choir of small truths, amateur and true. "Your hair looks pretty today," said a boy no older than Marcus, who clung shyly to a paper crown. "Thank you," she said and lifted a hand. Someone reached up and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. The gesture was smaller than a transaction and larger than charity. When it came time to cut the cake, Marcus was the one to help. He steadied the knife with a child's careful grip while her hand guided his. They shared a slice first, traded crumbs like an apology, and passed pieces to every neighbor. The father, who had arranged armies of staff and yet never known how to make a child's hollow day full, sat down at a table and let himself watch. He felt, in a slow, unwelcome way, that he had been missing the point of generosity for years, confusing spectacle with solace. At one point he stood and walked to Marcus, and the boy looked up with a mixture of nervousness and something like expectation. "Why did you come alone?" the father asked. Marcus blinked. "I didn't have to come alone. I could have sent a note. But Miss Jada said if you want something different you do it yourself. If she weren't there I would have never known. She said to be brave when it's scary." "You're brave?" the father said, almost as if confirming a rumor. "I don't think I'm brave. I just brought a cookie," Marcus said with the kind of shrug that belongs to people who don't inflate their kindness. The father put his hand on the boy's shoulder. It was an odd gesture, clumsy with all its privilege. "Thank you," he said. "No problem," Marcus replied. "Now can I have some cake?" There was laughter, warm and sudden, And the father realized that gratitude could be small and frequent like a heartbeat, not always big and showy like the press releases his office sent out. He also realized that he had the power, finally, to change the story his daughter had been handed, that she would not have to grow up certain that people would stand at a distance like a line of unspoken judgments. After the guests dispersed, leaving behind glitter in the carpet and good humor in the air, the girl and Marcus sat on the wide steps of the veranda. The night settled in like a blanket stitched with the city's distant hum. "Why did you want to come?" she asked, looking at him with the steady interest of someone who knew how to ask the important questions. "I wanted to see if you smile for real," Marcus said. "I see you in the van sometimes when Miss Jada brings kids here. You look like you have a lot of light, but sometimes lights are covered. I wanted to see the uncovered one." To be continue.